Good morning. Good evening. Good afternoon. And remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Today, we make an important step towards the end of this journey. Not Unit 7 anymore, Unit 8. Not just Unit 8, but the last unit of the entire textbook. So we're almost there, really. The world today. The world today. 1945 to present. Present being 2001, before the school year started, which starts in the South, I believe, in August. And then in the North, it starts around September 5th. So this is from 1945 to about August 2001. The World Today, Unit 8, Chapter 32. The World Since 1945, an overview. 1945 to August 2001. The World Since 1945, Chapter 32. The Changing Political Climate. Setting the Scene, Section 1. 2 centuries ago, the American and French revolutions launched ideals such as natural rights of all people. In 1972, President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania in East Africa put those ideas in modern terms when he spoke of the goals of new nations that had freed themselves from colonial rule. Not going to try an accent here, just going to do British. There is a worldwide movement now, even within the imperialist countries, it exists. Even within the imperialist countries, it exists. To put an end to the exploitation of man by man. This movement will succeed. Eventually, imperialism and racialism will become merely a chapter in the history of man. We shall hear about it in the museums. Julius K. Nyerere. Freedom and Development is what that's from. The balance of power changed dramatically after 1945. European influence declined while United States and Soviet Union emerged as the world's dominant powers. Locked in a tense Cold War, perhaps the greatest change, however, was the collapse of the Western overseas empires and emergence of dozens of new countries. Oh, new chapter. I need some new glasses. Bear with me for 1 second. While you're bearing with me, could you scroll down about 2 scrolls and go to subscribe? That'd be great, because I'm at 59 subscribers here. We get to 60. This thumbnail, 2 big thumbs up. If not, I can't promise 2 big thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate all of my followers now, but I'm hoping for 1 more as a result of this video in celebration of Unit 8, The World Today. The World Today. As in August 2001. Because this book is 22 years from this date. 22 years outdated. This being August 2023. 22 years ago, this book came out. Copyright date 2001. Published 2002, but copyrights when it's set in stone. Am I wrong? Okay. An end to European and colonial empires. The post-war decades brought a major turning point in world history. The colonial empires built by Western powers during the age of imperialism crumbled. In Asia and Africa, people demanded and won freedom. Between 1950 and 1980, more than 50 new nations emerged in Africa alone. Nationalism and independence. Resistance to colonial rule had begun long before. By 1930s, nationalist movements had taken root in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. After World War II, nationalist leaders such as Gandhi in India insisted on independence. At first, Britain, France, and other powers tried to hold on to their empires, but the war had exhausted their military and financial resources. With subject people ready to fight for freedom, many war-weary Europeans had no desire for further conflict. The Cold War, too, undermined imperialism. The United States backed the rights of colonized people to self-determination. Its rival, the Soviet Union, also had long condemned Western imperialism. Soon, both sides were seeking allies among emerging nations. Different roads to freedom. In most areas, people achieved freedom largely through peaceful means. In a few regions, especially where many white had settled, colonial rulers were reluctant to leave. Desperate wars of liberation often resulted. France, for example, fought to hold on to Algeria in North Africa and to French Indochina in Southeast Asia. By contrast, it gave up its vast colonial holdings in West Africa without a struggle. Global impact. Altogether, around 90 new countries emerged during the Great Liberation, in quotations. Some, such as India and Nigeria, were large in area or population. Many others, such as Nepal, Kuwait, and Lesotho, were small. The new nations of Africa and Asia were well as the countries of Latin America became known as developing world. These countries became known as the developing world. Although these nations differed greatly from one another, they shared common goals. All were determined to pursue modernization, which meant building stable governments and developing their countries economically. They followed different paths towards modernization, but many experienced similar challenges. The needs and goals of developing nations transformed the post-war world. Most joined the United Nations, where they have become an important voice by uniting their interests and often voting as a bloc. Individually and in regional groups, a number of them have played significant roles in global political and economic affairs. The Cold War goes global. The Cold War goes global. The new nations emerged into a world dominated by and divided by the Cold War. The United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, nations strong enough to influence the acts and policies of other nations. They competed for influence by offering economic and military aid to developing nations. Each superpower wanted new countries to adopt its ideology, or system of thought, or belief. Either capitalism or socialism. Many new nations favored socialism, in part because their old colonial rulers had been capitalists. Other nations were attracted to the greater prosperity of capitalist West. Non-aligned nations. To avoid superpower rivalry, many new nations chose to remain non-aligned, that is, not aligned to either side of the Cold War. The goal of the non-aligned movement was to reduce world tension and promote economic policies that would benefit developing nations. Giant India, which blended a democratic government with a socialist economy, was a leader in non-alignment movement. Hotspots. In Africa, Latin America, and Asia, local conflicts took on a Cold War dimension. Often, the West, led by the United States, supported one side, and the Soviet bloc supported the other. Through such strategies, the superpowers confronted each other indirectly rather than head-to-head. Contributing to this tension was the Chinese Communist victory in 1949, when Mao Zedong forced one forces won control of mainland China. Mao Zedong and his forces won control of mainland China. The United States feared that the red tide would sweep around the world. American policies, therefore, were designed to stop the communist threat. On occasion, the Cold War did erupt into shooting wars, especially in Asia. Both Korea and Vietnam were torn by brutal conflicts in which the United States and Soviet Union played crucial roles, as you will read. The Cold War ends. We're just jumping there. How are we doing that? What do you mean? The Cold War ends. The Cold War ends. The Cold War ended suddenly in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. With the Western victory in the Cold War, tensions eased, and some long-standing conflicts were resolved. Many people hoped for a more peaceful world, but troubling local, regional, and global problems remained. Ethnic conflict. Within many nations, ethnic groups have clashed sometimes. Sometimes an ethnic group has demanded complete and partial independence to protect its cultural and political identity. For example, the Kurds have sought autonomy in Turkey and Iraq, while the people of East Timor have demanded independence from Indonesia. In other countries, such as Nigeria, conflicts have erupted between rival ethnic and religious groups. Often, economic and political issues have fueled ethnic clashes. A new nation seeks stability. After winning independence, new nations had high hopes for the future. Still, they faced immense problems, especially in Africa. Nations were created out of European colonies that had been carved up during the age of imperialism. People in new nations like Nigeria came from different cultural traditions and had few ties to unite them. The new nations wrote constitutions modeled on those of the Western democracies. Only a few, however, like India, were able to sustain democratic rule. In general, colonial rulers had done little to prepare the people for self-government. Many new nations were shaken by revolution or civil war. Often a wealthy Western-educated elite controlled the government and the economy. The great majority of people remained poor and cut off from advancement. As problems multiplied, the military and authoritarian leaders often took control. Many times these were the same people who had led the fight for liberation. They imposed order by building one-party dictatorships. They banned other political parties, claiming that a multi-party system threatened stability. Leaders waved banners for nationalism in hopes of overcoming ethnic and religious and regional division. Despite setbacks, democracy did make some progress in the late 1800s and 1900s. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, nations that had been ruled by dictators or by single party held multi-party elections. Some of these new democracies have lasted, others have not. Internal conflicts and lack of experience in representative government upset these fragile experiments in democracy. Regional and global organizations. Since 1945, transportation and communication systems have made the world increasingly interdependent. A hint of lemon. Interdependence is the dependence of countries on goods, resources, and knowledge from other parts of the world. Political, economic, cultural, and other links have created both problems and opportunities. A number of international organizations deal with issues of global concern. The United Nations was set up at the end of World War II as a forum for settling disputes. Its responsibilities, along with membership, have expanded greatly since 1945. The UN played a vital role in decolonization. Since then, it has tried to act as a peacekeeper for Cambodia, from Cambodia to the Middle East, and from Africa to the Balkans. And as you know about the Middle East since 2001, and as you know about warring tribes in Africa since 2001, that sentence has not been too much of a success. And I don't think that that's a controversial thing to say. Reddit. No one watches these videos, don't worry. And if they do, please comment. Vitriol is accepted. Since then, it has tried to be a peacekeeper from Cambodia to the Middle East and from Africa to the Balkans. Try as you might. Some UN interventions have been successful. Others have failed, because often members of nations could not agree on goals and methods. The UN agencies provided service for millions of people worldwide. The World Health Organization, WHO, for example, helped wipe out smallpox through a program of vaccinations. The WHO works with other groups to seek solutions to the AIDS crisis. Solved. Other UN programs aim to reduce malnutrition and ensure access to safe drinking water. Not in Manasquan, New Jersey, though. We have lead in our water. And they said, it's not enough for us to do anything about it. I have a letter from the whatever who says, there is lead in the water, but it's not enough for us to do anything about it. So don't worry about it. It could cause developmental delays for children, though. But it's not that much. So the UN doing really good for a place that's 50 miles away from the UN building. Lead in the water. Also a nice town. Wouldn't you expect a nice town to have it? I mean, even if you just want to be biased, wouldn't a nice town have not lead in the water? Okay. So other UN programs aim to reduce malnutrition and ensure access to safe drinking water. The UN has also sponsored global summits, conferences, and leaders and experts from around the world. These summits have discussed these issues such as the environment, women, and population. What do you mean by population? What do you mean by population? Many nations formed regional groups to promote trade or meet other common needs. Powerful regional trading blocs have emerged. In later chapters, you will see how such groups as the European Union and the North American Free Trade Association and the Association for Southeast Asian Nations have worked to lower trade barriers and promote free exchange of goods and services. The importance of global trade has been recognized by a series of international treaties. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, GATT, signed in 1947, tried to establish fair trade policies for all nations. In 1995, its goal was to establish global rules of trade to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. Some people have opposed it. At the highest levels, the Group of Seven, which represented the 7 most productive economies, the United States, Canada, really? Japan, Germany, France, Britain, and Italy. Canada? Has met annually to discuss common economic problems. Canada represents the 7 most productive economies? I didn't know Canada was so successful in their economy. I guess in August 2001, China hadn't really started making all of our electronics. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund, IMF, play a large role in the world economy, as you will read, by making loans to developing nations. Many other types of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, have forged valuable global networks, including the International Olympic Committee and the International Red Cross. Olympic, that's right. Running, jumping, diving, all that. Global issues. Many issues pose a challenge to world peace. Since the United States first exploded 2 atomic bombs in 1945, nations have poured resources into building nuclear weapons. the new number of nuclear weapons grew from 3 in 1945 to 50,000 in 1980s, and probably way more than that now. Deadly weapons. During the Cold War, efforts to curb arms race had only limited success. Yet, in 1968, many nations signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, agreeing to halt the spread of nuclear weapons. In 1995, the treaty was renewed, but some nations still refused to sign. Why, they asked, could a few nations like the United States and Russia keep nuclear weapons if they could not? In 1998, for example, Pakistan stirred global concerns when they announced successful tests of nuclear weapons. Even after the Cold War ended, many nations kept spending immense sums on the military. In nations split by ethnic or other conflicts, arms dealers sell weapons, including landmines. Many people have condemned the international arms trade. Others defend the economic rights of arms makers to produce and sell their goods on the free market. What about just giving them away? Human rights. In 1948, UN members approved the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. According to the document, all people are entitled to basic freedoms, rights and freedoms, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, property, birth, and other status. Human rights include the right to life, liberty, and security of person. In 1975, nations signed the Helsinki Accord, guaranteed to such basic rights as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as the rights to a fair trial, to earn a living, and to live in safety. Despite these documents, human rights abuses, including torture and arbitrary arrest, occurred around the world. At times, the world community pressed countries to stop abuse. Economic pressures, for example, was used to push South Africa to end its system of apartheid. In some countries, leaders have accused Western nations of trying to impose their own ideas about individual freedom. They claim that their cultures value the community over the individual. Chinese leaders, for example, have argued that the economic goals, such as improving the standard of living for their people, were more important than individual political freedom. The question of intervention. The human rights debate raised tough issues. Does the world community have a duty to step in to end abuses? How can it intervene when the UN Charter forbids any action that violates the independence of member nations? The UN and other organizations have a mixed record of intervention. In the 1990s, the UN sent peacekeepers to northern Iraq to protect the Kurds, an ethnic minority suffering brutal governmental persecution. For complex reasons, the UN was slow to move against the Serbs, who killed and drove Muslims in Bosnia from their homes. The UN did not intervene when Hutus massacred an estimated 1 million Tutsis in Rwanda. In 1999, however, NATO forces bombed Serbia to stop its attack on ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. Ethnic conflicts especially have fueled the debate over intervention to protect human rights. Terrorism. Since the 1960s, incidents of terrorism have increased around the world. Terrorism is the deliberate use of violence, especially against civilians, to achieve political goals. Through bombings, kidnappings, airplane hijackings, and shootings, terrorists focus attention on their causes and try to force governments to give in to their demands. Extremists on both sides of conflicts in Northern Ireland have murdered civilians. A terrorist group killed Israeli athletes in 1972 Olympic Games to push its demand for Palestinian state. Separate terrorist groups assassinated India's Rajiv Gandhi and bombed United States embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. To combat terrorism, governments have passed tough laws and increased watchfulness. And they're about to increase it more at the time of this book's copyright date of 2001. They're about to do more of that increased watchfulness. Some governments have been accused of state-sponsored terrorism. That is, it was in quotations, that is, the government trains and arms extremists to carry out attacks abroad. Human rights groups have argued that governments even engaged in terrorism at home when they used torture, murder, and illegal arrests against their own citizens. The FBI. I hope you all have a wonderful day. God bless. Goodbye.